Hello everyone and welcome. Manchester United's defeat in that terrible Europa League final yesterday does not signify just another humiliation in potentially the worst season of the Red Devils in their modern history. No, it especially marks a shortfall of over 120 million euros. The BBC had headlined it a few days ago. It was the most important match in recent years for Manchester United, perhaps one of the richest clubs in the world, fourth in revenue among football clubs worldwide, but despite this, showing astronomical losses, more than 120 million last year, and over the last 3 years, they must be between 330 and 350 million euros in losses. That is to say, the club is doing very badly financially and is finding it increasingly difficult to comply with the new rules established in the Premier League regarding deficits and generated losses. This is to avoid what happened in the past with Chelsea, which spent without limits under Abramovich or City. They are trying to set some small rules also for other clubs because there are still some that put themselves in very dangerous situations. They are deeper in the red. And so United had an absolute need. Realize that this Europa League victory for Tottenham means the Champions League. The Champions League gives you TV rights, stadium revenue, marketing and everything. That is, it's ensuring at least 100 to 120 million minimum. However, this year, United, so that you understand. Already you have the dismissal of Ten Hag. So already you have almost 16 or 17 million. Thank you, good night. Second season without qualifying for the Champions League. This means that in the deal with Adidas, you have more than 10 million. Thank you, good night. You'll have to return them to Adidas. Moreover, your ranking in the Premier League is disastrous. You had planned for a much higher position. But as you know, with TV rights, there is a portion linked to the ranking. That means you will also have over 30 million in lost revenue. So you add 30 plus 10 and 10. We're already at 40 plus 45. So it was planned. So we are already at a minimum of 60 million euros in lost revenue. If you add besides, because it's the problem of Manchester United in recent years, the club generates plenty of income, especially with marketing, as we explained, the branding and everything. Except now, since you are having more and more trouble qualifying, even just for the European Cup, as you become almost a laughingstock, you are less and less visible. Naturally, the contracts have clauses, so that causes you a lot of lost earnings, yet your wage bill is still just as large. So, some will tell you, yes, but if United had qualified for the Champions League, the contracts would have increased by 25% with certain clauses. So it would have further increased the wage bill. And United is trying to control this wage bill. It's a reality. Nevertheless, the absence from European competitions levels your marketing and sponsorship revenues, which are even decreasing. And we remind you that you could have been finer, except that in recent years, your transfer balance is scandalous. Meaning, years ago, United was able to spend 250 million in the transfer market and sell for 10 or 20 million. Meaning you were at negative 200 million. Just last summer, it's negative 140 million, if you really compare the pure purchases and resales at that level. And we will still temper that. United is doing a little better. That means we are trying to better control the wage bill. And unlike previous years, we are finally managing to sell players. Except now, you can see that the squad is not enough, it's poorly constructed, and there are many other problems. Now, you have a precarious financial situation with the owner who himself is also facing economic difficulties. And you add to that the statements from Garnacho or Fernandes, there's also a huge uncertainty concerning the coach. So it legitimately raises the question, what about the Red Devils next year? We will stick to the finances by recalling that INEOS is experiencing difficulties in this company. The Guardian had mentioned it, as did most of the English press, knowing there were also these Bisbee. It is reminded that they used to be sponsors of the All Blacks. In the end, this happened. They couldn't really fulfill it, so they're trying to cut costs. This is where we see the unfortunate statements from the owner, Ratcliffe, who almost criticized Nice by saying that he wasn't really interested, that he didn't like the level. Now, Nice is having this heroic season, but we've explained it for a while. Not only does he want to part with Nice, but he is asking for impossible sums. He wants 200, 250 million, a club that loses so much money. It's nice to dream, Jim Ratcliffe, especially since the lifestyle has been greatly reduced, which, by the way, coincided with Nice's improvement over the last 2 or 3 seasons. As they say, sometimes you don't just need money, but rather ideas. Now, we'll see what will happen with Nice. It's a real question. Lausanne is yet another one, and we know that at United there have been several layoff plans, and when we start looking at whether employees are going to eat in the cafeteria or not, you take that away from them, small things, let's say. When we get to that point, it recalls Gerard Lopez, it brings back many things. So beware, Manchester United is not going to sink, we're not going to have another Bordeaux situation, but it shows you that your shareholder doesn't have the means to follow through, especially with such a significant structural challenge. That's not even the case, actually. Because at United, if you remove this absolutely outrageous transfer balance, the club doesn't actually lose money. Because look, last year we had approximately 140 or 150 million difference between purchases and sales. You will lose about the same number by the end of the year. So we see that the club is generally balanced, except that this balance is explained by very high sponsorship contracts, which are currently decreasing since you are no longer competitive in sports. Now, your wage bill is going to stay quite high. So yes, you're going to try again to get rid of some players, you'll bring it down, but your wage bill, the decrease you'll have, it will be almost equivalent, even slightly less than the decrease you have in marketing and sponsorship revenue. The other problem, obviously, is all the interest, because as you know, the Glazers have put the club into debt, more than 1 billion. We already talked about all that. The problem is that the interest rates are increasing. Every year there are tens of millions to be paid in interest, and it will increasingly be the case to finance all the recent purchases.
At the same time, Ratcliffe, he has about 25%, I believe, of United shares, but he has sporting control of the club. He had bought that for around 1 billion, if I recall correctly, overall. So the club was valued at 4 billion.
Qatar was perhaps okay to go for it, apparently. There was only Ratcliffe at that price because you could clearly see that United was at an absolute loss and that there were going to be dangers. Yet is Ratcliffe's company today strong enough for certain levels? It raises questions when you see that today INEOS is investing less and less in sports and is encountering some difficulties. Here we can also question Ratcliffe's empire and what he is doing. That is to say, very competent people were brought to United. That is a reality. Except you already know, Sarkozy changes position on pocket, sends it to Jean-François. And why not? A reorganization is needed and maybe it takes time. I think we remind that in Nice and Lausanne, it has often been folkloric. Except that you take Ashworth, for example, whom you bring in for the sports direction. You dismiss him as well, so he also needs a nationality there. Then you change the coach. Ten Hag, you still let him handle the transfer market a bit. Ten Hag, we all need to talk about him because,
I mean, he's done things in recent years, but it's wow.
Wow, even if I mention it again, because here we can talk about Ten Hag and Ratcliffe. The first ones responsible are the Glazers, who have indebted the club. And every year, I want to remind once again, because it is important, when you pay for your seat at Old Trafford, when you buy a jersey of whatever you want, that there is a little part used to repay the debts these people have piled up on the club's back to buy it. You know, the cash cow. Yeah, and now you're going to keep paying for it, because as the years go by, the interest increases. And United is going to be very much like a cash cow. That's why I'm very pessimistic about the future, and the Champions League qualification was not only necessary for this season, but for all the ones to come. So returning to Ten Hag, who has a record, particularly on transfers, we let him do his thing. We also moved on to Solskjaer, the methods. There was only Rangnick. Rangnick was the opposite. In fact, he said, I can't take it anymore. And he understood that the problem was much deeper than that. INEOS, I understand it. Obviously, it will take time. We agree. And the problem is that you made mistakes on almost all the choices. So, the summer transfer window, there you go. You already changed the sporting director and everything. It's not going well. At INEOS, you make changes. You have me come in. You want me to change position. Okay. Well, why not restructuring? Then you go for Amorim, so clearly there's a problem. Even Amorim, you see what he's saying, there is an issue with some of his players. Then you see the players' statements, you realize there is a deeper discomfort. We talked about it a few months ago. United is a club we've been following for years, and what's happening is terrible. We know there's a completely rotten situation, and naturally one defeat leads to another, etc. But now, today, you see guys who are completely disconnected from reality. I mean, Garnacho has had behavior problems for a while now. He had already had issues with Ten Hag. He wasn't happy and all. So, I mean, Amorim, Ten Hag, both had problems with him at that level regarding behavior. So maybe Amorim makes unfortunate statements, whatever you want. But at some point, when you have no structure, when you've lost that structure, when you let everything go, because, excuse me, there have been transfers.
If there weren't any gimmick operations, I'm on board, it's not possible. I mean, with the yellow card at 80 million euro, we had explained the mindset. It's not the player's problem.
The problem is what you're paying. Even less, Ugarte, you pay 50 million because you let Mendes do everything. Moreover, the worst part about Mendes is that he brings Choneves to PSG, which helps them a little, and he brings you Ugarte. It's not the same quality, let's say. So what are you doing with Ugarte today? Okay, yes, I know United wants to sell players. They've been trying to put Casemiro on the golf course for a year. And then you also have the agent games. Because Amori, we know he's very close to Antero Henrique, who notably manages the Qatar Star League. I wouldn't be surprised to see a United player in Qatar, maybe just a personal intuition. But we know they want to offload their high salaries. Okay, it's necessary, very well. And on the bright side, we know that United is now approaching a few players. However, the problem is that many have lost value and you think they are unsellable. Nonetheless, Anthony, his loan to Betis has revitalized him. The problem is that Betis will not have the means to pay what United would want, and there are very few clubs that would want him. But you might manage to get a transfer fee here and there. The same goes for Rashford, who has been revitalized at Aston Villa. The concern is, especially for Rashford, that his salary is so large that there aren't many clubs that can afford him with United's expectations. But you still have two players who were completely devalued, who have now regained some value. So that's good. Meanwhile, you have guys, let's say, if you will, let's say reserved, Minou, Diallo, Yoro. You want to build up with these young ones. You add guys like Azraoui, maybe some others, I'm not too sure. You still have, looking to the future, that's a reality. Then we'll see what Fernandes does, who has been very enigmatic in this regard. We know the Saudis want him. The thing is, United, the management wants to lower all the high salaries because they can't really handle all that anymore. So you wonder, if we speak strictly from an economic and sports perspective, there's already a Morris question. Do you keep him or not? Because right now it's not working at all. But if you fire him, you'll have to put in more than 20 million. But you don't really have the 20 million. So the question is, what do you do? Because next year, given the squad, let's be very clear. You won't be in the European Cup. I mean, it needs a lot of strengthening, but properly strengthening. Because the problem is that United has been throwing money out the window for too long. And there are gaps in certain positions. It's almost alarming. Some will say there were injuries, lack of strength. Yes, it needs revitalizing, and that takes time. You also have the whole locker room to change, except unlike previous years where you could be in surplus, meaning you could afford to put in 200 grand and sell for 80 million. And there you go. You can't anymore. You can't anymore. That means now you will have to balance your sales and purchases. So you can sell players like we've said, you have Rashford, you have Anthony, etc.
Except you won't be able to sell them at full price either. Maybe Rashford, but as I say, he earns £375,000 a week, so very few clubs can handle the transfer and the salary. So you'll have to break even. But for once, you mustn't make a mistake with the profiles and stop overpaying. And the other problem we have is that many people today don't want to go to United, saying, we're not going to bury ourselves. I see rumours Ryan Sharkey, but Ryan Sharkey will never go to United. Their guys are not going to bury themselves. Well, you still have some agents very attracted to the idea of going to United, because in fact, in commissions, for years, it's been paying well everywhere.
Even at a certain point, when you have a sports project, it's sad to say. But if you want to go to a big club, you no longer go to United.
Somewhere, nevertheless, wouldn't it be the time, with low cost, to work more cleverly? Like Nice did, club also owned by Ratcliffe? Well, it's possible, except that now you can no longer fail. And when I see and hear some agents tell me, so basically everyone is for sale. You arrive, well, basically,
They really want to keep the guys from their training program because they know there's an image aspect and they have this youth project.
but the others, there you go. Anyone comes with an offer, we will be happy to listen. We know that the market this summer will still be very complicated, and especially in England too. Don't be fooled. Now, we have to comply with the new rules. So it won't be open bar as one might imagine, especially since United is not in the World Cup. The revenues of Vin and Todd are plummeting. So, what are they going to do? Are they going to keep the coach? Today, there are doubts. As I told you, even for Fernandes, if there is an offer, the owners will more than listen, even though we know all that he has contributed and everything.
But at some point, you also need to treat yourself. So why not?
Except that this summer you will not be able to spend like in the last seasons, so somewhere you will be more reasonable with your spending on everything. I repeat, you brought in people generally who know the football world, who know the sports world, except that you have to find them a good position and a clear hierarchy, which is not the case. Especially now with the coach, we might give him some freedom. But in any case, with his squad, it is not working. The players criticize him for being too dogmatic, not wanting to adapt to them, Mecca. In short, we are at a dead end for the moment. The problem today is whether United has the means to do something else. And especially, did its shareholder bite off more than they can chew? And I wouldn't be surprised to see new rumors in the coming weeks suggesting that the other parties, because we remind you that the Glazers are still the majority in terms of shares, except in fact, they have handed over control of the sports club to Ratcliffe and INEOS. Is Qatar not going to get back into the race a bit? Because believe me, in Doha, they want the club in England. And I want to remind you that the Emir of Qatar has always been a fan of United. And if they have the opportunity to do it, they will do it. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of articles popping up, etc. And that there is another very toxic atmosphere around the club, because there will be another battle for the control of United, a club that is unfortunately hitting rock bottom. And we hope they will get back on their feet quickly, because next year is coming very fast. There are promoted teams like Leeds. They won't be pushovers either. So be careful, because they will still need to be strong. Because when you look at the second half of the season, you're not that far from the championship. And we're talking about United. And that shows us the moral of this story. You can be one of the richest clubs in the world, one of the greatest clubs in history, legendary, etc. At some point, when you slack off and forget too much about the sporting side, sooner or later, you pay for it. You may have all the contracts you want and everything, but at some point, it's football that also determines your wealth. So obviously, good luck to the Red Devil. Bean team.